In this chapter, we're going to go over some techniques for selecting the different modeling components in Maya. So the most common way to do this is by holding down the right mouse button and then selecting the component you want. For example, right now I'm holding down the right mouse button and selecting edges. And now I'm going to hold down the right mouse button and then select faces. And we can click on a face, or we can drag select a group of faces. And we can do the same thing with UVs. And finally with vertex faces, although this is something that I personally never use. And now if I right click and hit object mode, this exits out of component mode. Okay, so let me show you some cool tricks for selecting components. So if we select some faces here and then hold Shift Control, we can add to the selection. And if we just hold Shift, we can subtract from the selection. So right now I've made a selection and I'm holding down Shift and Control to add to that selection. And then holding down Shift, I can subtract from the previous selection. So let's go back to object mode. And now I want to demonstrate how to select two types of components at the same time. And the way that this is done is by holding down the right mouse button, selecting the component you want, holding down Shift and Control, and then selecting additional components. So what I'm doing right now is holding down the right mouse button, selecting the component I want, holding Shift and Control, and you can see that I had multiple types of each component selected. Okay, so maybe you don't like holding down the right mouse button to select edges and faces and stuff. If that's the case, there's another solution, and that is through these hotkeys here. And you may have noticed in previous chapters that this is the way I work. I feel it's much faster. You can see how quickly I can get at the different components without having to hold down the right mouse button. So now I want to go over some of the tools that are found in the Select menu here. The first one being the Select Edge Loop tool. And the way this works is you double click on an edge and it will select all the connecting edges. Unless that is, you're selecting an edge that is next to a hole. And I hope that it's obvious that using these edge loops is much faster than selecting edges individually. So now let's go over the Select Edge Ring tool, which is kind of like the opposite of selecting an edge loop. And what this does is if you double click, it'll select a ring of edges instead of the loop of the edge. And remember how earlier I said you couldn't select an edge loop next to a hole? Well, you can if you use the Select Border Edge tool. But don't try and use the Select Border Edge tool for regular edge loops, or you'll get an error like we see down here in the lower right-hand corner of Maya. So if you need to make an edge loop next to a hole, the Border Edge tool is the way to go. But what we want to learn right now is how to grow and shrink a selection, which is done by making a selection, then hitting Shift period or Shift comma to shrink the selection. Another cool thing we can do in Maya is convert selections to other components. For example, let's select these faces right here, go up to Select, Convert Selection, and now I've converted the selected faces to vertices. Let's do that again, but now take our vertices and convert them to edges, and now let's convert our edges back to faces. Now the final tool that I want to demonstrate is the Select Shortest Edge Path tool. And the way this tool works is if we select two components, it selects what it thinks is the shortest path between the components. And while I've found this tool to be useful at times on very complicated meshes, I don't use it as much as I use some of the other selection tools. And I hope that if you've been watching and maybe had some questions about what selection tools I've been using, that I've been able to answer all those in this chapter. And that's about it. Hopefully I didn't go too fast and you can open up Maya and try these all out for yourself.